If you don't know what I'm going to be talking about in this video, I'm going to be covering three things. Going to be covering Racing into the Night, which is a song, The Temptation of Thanatos, the story that inspired the song, and something I like to call Unhonorable Seppuku. If you don't know what seppuku is, look it up. I'm not going to explain it anymore. I've explained it too many times I've done too many takes of this and I want to cry. So let's go ahead and just talk about the story first, because I think it's a lot more important, and it also contains all of the information that you need, as the song doesn't really delve into it as much, right? It's still a song at the end of the day, so you can't cover as many aspects, I guess. So essentially, this story is about two lovers. They sort of just talk it out, and then they jump off a building together. So now they have 2 kills, 1 death, and 2 assists. Now, a very big theme in the story is Thanatos and Eros. So if you don't know, Thanatos is the personification of death, kind of, and Eros is the god of love. So, and these two characters, they essentially, well, as it's explained to us, they govern people, and Thanatos will cause people to be inclined towards death, and Eros will incline people towards life. Now, obviously, this is very weird, because Eros is the god of love, right? But Thanatos is the personification of death. However, Thanatos is the personification of non-violent death, because violent death is handled by different entities, and they're called the Kyries. And also, Hades is the god of the dead, so, like, is Thanatos really the god of death? Because, like, God of the Dead and God of Death is kind of the same thing if you really think about it. I guess you could try to make a point there, but not really. Also, Phanes is the god of creation, so like, why use Eros, which is the god of love? Love and life are not the same thing. And also, Ananka is the primordial goddess of inevitability, which I think is a lot closer to death than Thanatos, because Thanatos is only a portion of that. And also, Phanes is a primordial god. So if you wanted them to both be in the same category, that would make a lot more sense, because Hades isn't a primordial god. He's like a few generations down. Primordial means like old as shit. And also, Eros and Thanatos are both Daima, which is why I assume they're put together, because they're in the same category, and there's nothing really close to the two. But like, yeah, no, just use Ananka and Phanes, or use Hades and Phanes, or use Hades and yeah, no, just use Hades and Phanes. It makes a lot more sense. So we are seeing here that there's not a direct correlation between life and life, death and death, or like creation and life, or death and death. It's more so that the people, the demo that are governing people have the sort of inclination, even though they're not the gods of that aspect. Now, Thanatos is he's very much known for his gentle nature, right? The Kyries handle violent death. They're like the people who are on the battlefields, and then when soldiers die, they'll literally like rip their heart out or some shit. I don't even remember. I don't want to think about it. But Thanatos is more so this sort of like gentle touch that lets you slowly wither away. Think of like Kindred from League of Legends, where Lamb is like the gentle one and Wolf's the not gentle one, right? So we can sort of see why Thanatos was chosen over the Kyries or Hades. But with Eros, I think it's a lot more awkward, because is the implication that love is what lets you live your life, or lets you live, or wants you to live? Because if so, I think that's a point that doesn't really get brought up in the story. And honestly, it's a very interesting aspect, because there's definitely easier ways to go about it. Pick I don't know, Phanes. Phanes is a lot easier. It makes a lot more sense. So we're seeing this sort of correlation between love and life in a romance story. I think you get the connection there. Also, I wanted to bring up this quote, because this is a very important aspect of the story as well. It seems that to those who can see it, the god of death is most attractive. It resembles their ideal person, so to speak. Be careful when your ideal person shows up out of the blue. Essentially, the point here is to show that the narrator, the narrator's lover is Thanatos. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more evidence to support that, but this is just more so a summary of it all. But yeah, essentially, it's implied that Thanatos is the female. Now, why is it like that? Honestly, I don't really know. It feels very weird that Thanatos is just fucking with people, so maybe it's not true, right? But yeah, I just wanted to explain that, because that's very important later, especially when they're talking about the song. So In the story, the female also has visions of the ideal person by Thanatos. So we're seeing this sort of weird sort of inception thing. It's kind of weird. But I want to move on from that because I think it's something that the story doesn't cover very well because it's a Japanese story that got um, translated in English. I read two translations. They were both kind of the same thing. It was very awkward. Um, but yeah, sorry, a huge tangent. But I want to talk about how unhonorable seppuku was sort of presented in the story because I initially thought that it'd be different from the song, and it was, but it wasn't as different as I thought it would be. But I'm just gonna read this out because I wanted to sort of preserve the. I wanted to make sure I wouldn't get off track. I guess I wanted to like preserve my points in a good fashion because this is very. I usually talk in a very messy manner, and like yeah. The story takes a fairly neutral stance on it all, using Greek mythology as a means to somehow recreate the mentality that someone of this nature would go through in the real world. Although the characters most definitely are content with death, the way that Thanatos is applied to the fictional aspects of the story adds a layer of sourness to it all, as it's implied that Thanatos lured this boy into doing the unthinkable. Overall, while the characters want to die, which makes sense, which makes death seem like some sort of unending slumber, we know that this is ultimately a trap set up by Thanatos, which adds a twisted second perspective to the gentle nature that he is meant to be associated with in Greek mythology. If you didn't really get any of that, you can try to reading it by yourself. I don't really want to simplify it because I think simplifying it takes away the major points that I want to bring in. Essentially, I think that this is the best way I can put it. Now, I want to talk about the song, and essentially how this is going to work is that we're going to have a part. They're separated by paragraphs in the lyrics, so that's just how I separated them. Um, so, yeah. And then we'll have some little speaker notes at the bottom because I don't want to forget shit, and I feel like I am. So this first part, they use sinking and melting a lot in the translation. Again, this is a Japanese song, so keep that in mind. It's just a translation. So we're seeing sinking and melting. That's a thing that we're going to be seeing a lot when we're using imagery for falling. Because you know they fell, they fell off the building. um, so for the second part, this song is very good at using the romantic aspect of the story. It focuses a lot more on the narrator's feelings and thoughts, which is something that the story also does, but it doesn't add as much dialogue, which I think is really nice. It also, this is just referencing the introduction of the actual story, so keep in mind that the song is fairly similar to the story in the way that it goes over the summary of the story. So yeah. Also, so for this one, I think it's fairly basic. It's just romantic stuff, right? But we're obviously TikTok is referencing the noise of a clock, which can sometimes be used for finality or inevitability. In the situation, it would be the finality of death. Now, with this chorus, I mean, it's just romance stuff. I thought there'd be a lot more in here, but it's actually just fairly simplistic. It's a lot of romance stuff mixed with this sort of dark aspect of an honorable seppuku, which I think is sort of the nature of the song. That's something that the story doesn't do as well because a majority of it is just this back and forth between the narrator and his lover. Now this is where things get very confusing if you've only listened to the song before because they don't talk about the whole governed by Thanatos thing or governed by Eros or anything like that, right? So this part was really confusing. But if you look into the story, then obviously you know what I'm talking about. It's talking about how when you're governed by Thanatos, you'll see like the ideal person in your vision. So yeah, that kind of thing. Now, this part I absolutely hate because I don't understand what it means. The first two lines are not completely nonsensical. Like I get what they mean, but also what is that? What are you referring to? Also, the first one's not even a sentence. But the third and fourth lines, they're just referencing ooey gooey love stuff, right? Now, this is a very big turning point in the story, where the narrator admits that he wants to die. You see this in the story a bit later on, right? So, we're seeing this sort of, removal of Greek mythology, and what we're putting in instead is a bunch of just emotion. It's very emotionally filled, essentially, which I think is you're essentially playing to the song's strengths at that point, because the song is very good at that, because music helps to invoke emotion. This is again referring to how clocks represent inevitability, right? This is also a turning point in the story, so it's also referencing that. Here it's just talking about, I assume, the narrator's lover, or a vision of the ideal person from Thanatos. I'm not really 100% sure. Here it's referencing the prior chorus. You can see sinking and melting again. You can see this again, a turning point. Now he's accepting death, or at least he's admitting that he is, right? And this last part, fairly simplistic. Now, like I said before, the song is very good at invoking emotion instead of providing these sort of very interesting points on Unhonorable Seppuku, which is why I think it's more of an inspiration than anything else. I am going to do this again just because I think it's very important. The song's lyrics are surprisingly similar to the story in terms of the themes it presents, but leaves out the mythological aspect, which I feel can either be either labeled as removing aspects of the story out of laziness or simplicity. Regardless, it does allow the lyricist to go all out and make a twisted love story that still references the story in a multitude of ways. This is most definitely one of the more important differences between the song and the story. It's obviously important to keep in mind that this is a song first and foremost, and I genuinely go against the idea that this song was poorly built. It just doesn't add as much to the table due to its literary limitations, as well as not being able to pack in as much information as a short story. So, kind of just what I was saying earlier. I think overall, I think I expected the song to have a lot more differences than the story, and it didn't. And I don't know why I expected that. It just didn't really make as much sense, because when I think inspiration, I don't think just removing aspects of the story, right? But we do have to remind ourselves that this is a completely different art form, so that's, I'm assuming that's why. But yeah, thanks for watching. I don't really know if I want to go into more philosophical aspects like this. I was really interested in it, but I think I kind of ended up coming short in terms of things to talk about. It felt very awkward, right? Like, especially with the whole like Eros and Thanatos thing. They didn't really go into that too much, but I don't know. But yeah, have a good day.